Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of the ONI-ology Series Spaced Out Edition. ONI-ology is my series of educational oxygen not included videos that have the goal of helping new players understand the game. This series will go over various topics like game progression mechanics so that you can be set up for success. In today's video, we're going to be going over the early game from beginning to end, from the initial start to survival stability, and eventually reaching the early game goal of including oxygen somewhat permanently. That's right, you actually have to solve the namesake pretty early on before you could really thrive. And so, let's begin. At the start, you'll spawn by a printing pod with your duplicates along with some food and oxygen that will last a handful of cycles. Assuming you understand the basics, you'll want to start digging, gaining resources and exploring the map. Cycle 1 goals are to have at least one outhouse built and to not be on the floor. Bonus points for getting a wash basin built as well. While doing so, be on the lookout for a couple things. Clean water for both research and bathrooms, oxygen generator resources, which will likely be algae, but this differs depending on your starting asteroid, and metal, so that you can start research. Next, you'll want to get started with power and build your first wheel and battery combo, so that you could power an oxygen diffuser and research station. The first recommended tech is basic farming and meal prep so that you could start building farm tiles and growing food. After that, you're free to tech up anything that you think you need. I tend to find myself going for the supercomputer right away to unlock tier 2 research and researching as much as I can, but I do save the tier 3 into the mid game. You can't really go wrong as you'll eventually need some of the techs deeper down the line anyways, and while teching up, you'll want to keep digging around and explore the map to find out what resources, plants, and critters you have available. You'll notice that these resources tend to be grouped up, separated by walls of granite or abyssalite. These areas are biomes, each with their own set of resources and characteristics. I won't be going too much into the details of this, but it's good to recognize the biomes. So why do all this digging? Resources mainly, but you're actually looking for the Dreco critter or the thimbleweed plant. You'll likely won't utilize either right away, but it's good to have them located since they'll be used later on in the mid-game. And the second is for building rooms. Rooms are very effective early on and can provide substantial morale bonuses to make it easier to manage stress. On the default settings, hit F11 to bring up the room overlay to see available room types, bonuses given, and the requirements for creating them. You'll likely want at least a barracks and bed so that the dupes don't get sore backs from sleeping on the floor. And if you're looking for the most impactful room, that would be the Great Hall. It provides a whopping +6 morale for dupes who eat in the room, and the dupes will eat every day, so make sure they have a seat inside and enough time to chow down. Once you get your dupes settled in, your goal will be to reach survival stability, which is the temporary balancing point where you could provide both oxygen and food for the foreseeable future. That way you can continue to research, explore, and eventually find a way to get to indefinite stability. So we've mentioned this a few times, but what is exploring? In Oxygen Not Included, it's simply revealing the map and finding out what's behind the fog. Each planetoid has a predetermined set of resources and size that you roll when you generate your world seed. All you have to do is simply dig a path and keep going, adding ladders, digging through resources until you reach the edge of the map, signified by the wall of neutronium. Knowledge is power, so you'll want to reveal as much of the map as possible, and pay attention to the elements and temperatures while doing so. Duplicates do need to breathe oxygen and also take environmental damage once it gets above 69 degrees Celsius. A lot of biomes also don't have a lot of breathable gas, which means you will have to provide it yourself or choose a different biome to explore. Also, don't forget to watch out for germs. While most germs won't take out the dupes outright, it's still annoying since it causes them to get a lot less work done. So how do you prevent germs or hot gases from coming into the base? Germs typically are going to be a case-by-case study, but a good solution would be a liquid lock. Building tiles in this configuration and filling it with a liquid so your dupes could pass through the gap while keeping the areas separate. It will keep the gases and the germs on the gases out, but the temperature will creep through the liquid, so watch out. The dupes will also have to dive through the water each time, which does cause them to get a stress debuff known as soggy feet or sopping wet. But the liquid lock will help you contain gases very well. See, each time you dig and create a tile, it creates a new space for gases to occupy, meaning that you're going to need to generate more oxygen to keep the same pressure level. If you want a little bit more control over that, you're going to have to create a perimeter of tiles and then add a liquid lock at choice locations to create a closed base. The closed base is a playstyle. Well, you'll live inside this box and utilize either Atmos suits or oxygen masks to go outside, where all the heat generating buildings are, minimalizing the amount of oxygen you generate while separating the heat. The other is to have an open base, where you make the entire planet breathable by overproducing oxygen and distributing whatever it's needed. Of course, this means though that you'll have to deal with the heat problems as they come. While each playstyle has its pros and cons, it's not important which style you choose, since I believe it's really just a preference that will differ with different people. At this point, you may have received a skill point, whether it's from printing a new dupe or your starting dupes gaining enough experience. Opening up the skill tree, you'll see available skills with the lowest levels on the left. Hard icons on the skills means that your dupes are interested in that line of work and has a lower morale impact with each skill added. These skills can potentially give your dupe a new ability, whether it's to dig through stronger rocks, art capabilities, or even plumbing knowledge, all situationally useful but at a price. See, each skill added increases the morale needed by each dupe to stay happy and stress-free. Due to that, I don't recommend spending all the skill points whenever it's gained or available. Only spend it as needed, because ideally, you want at least 2 morale more than what's required so that you can trigger the high morale stress modifier. This is a very useful modifier that reduces stress by 20%. While it may seem weird, floating skill points and leaving them unassigned is something I actually commonly do until I get to the later stages of the game. It's easier to maintain a colony of specialists than to maintain a smaller colony of super dupes that could do everything. But to each their own. Here's a couple bits of information to better decision making regarding the initial balancing point. Each dupe normally breathes 100 grams of oxygen per second, and each cycle lasts 600 seconds. Exceptions though for the dupes that have either diver's lungs or the mouth breather train. Using the oxygen diffuser as an example, you could see that it provides 500 grams of oxygen per second, which is enough to supply 5 dupes as long as you have the algae. For this, I'd recommend to turn on the resource tracking on the bottom right, and you would want to select your oxygen resource. For our case, it's going to be algae. That way you'll keep track of how much you have so you won't get blindsided as it depletes. Keep in mind though that depending on which building you use to generate oxygen, the resource and amount of oxygen will vary. Gases move very slow, especially around one wide choke point, so it's very beneficial to spread out your generators and to not group them up, since you won't have the power to pump and distribute said oxygen. When it comes to food in the early game, you won't be able to stop the food from eventually rotting, so stockpiling food is out of the question. Instead, what you want to do is approach a balanced production method. This means you only want to grow as much food as the duplicates eat. See, each dupe burns about 1,000 kcals over the course of each cycle, with the exception to dupes with rad eater or bottomless stomach. So you'll need to grow enough food to last through each growth period. To better explain, we'll use mealwood for this example. Mealwood fully grows over the course of 3 cycles, providing 600 kcals per harvest. Taking the 1,000 kcals per cycle, this means we'll need to provide 3,000 kcals per duplicate. So we would divide the 3,000 total by the harvest amount of 600, giving us 5 mealwood plants per dupe. This means to keep a colony of 6 fed, we would need to have 30 plants already growing. Now you might be wondering if you should stagger the plant growth, and the answer is no. Dupes burn 1,000 kcals per cycle, but each dupe holds up to 4,000 kcals and could spend a few days without food. And they actually will attempt to make up the calories for missed meals if you have enough food available. And you could always track this by looking at the vitals menu on the top to see the current kcals in their stomachs and how much they've eaten this cycle. Any dupe that falls below 1,000 kcals will automatically trigger a starvation warning that has an audio alert. Another pro tip would be to submerge your food storage in a carbon dioxide pool so that it slows down the rotting process by creating a sterile environment. We'll get more into food preservation later on, so for now, all you need to do is make a U-shaped pit and to move CO2 inside. The CO2 should stay put as it's the heaviest gas, as long as the pressure levels don't fluctuate. If you find yourself in a bad situation where you can't wait for food to grow, there's always the micro musher building that could create food. You can convert dirt and water to create a mush bar that is calories on demand. But be warned, this is extremely wasteful and should only be used as a last resort. Not only does it use both Tier 1 and Tier 2 research resources, it's also extremely inefficient in resource costs. The mush bars also spawn with food poisoning every time it's made. While there are other recipes you could try, the food on the musher also spoils faster than the raw counterparts. Ideally, you'll want to grow food in this stage and wait until the mid-game to start cooking. A couple of pro tips for newer players. At any point in the game, especially around the beginning where it's very valuable, you can press the Z button to trigger the star map and then view the details of your planetoid. There's actually a lot of key information here. It'll give you a breakdown of biomes, geysers that exist on your planet, potential meteor showers. So you could use this information to better plan your colony once you know what's around. And if you're playing on classic mode, you'll actually see the geysers pop up as question marks, as they are true random until you find them. Another is to check geysers before mining. Simply hit the priority tool and click on the exclamation mark. Tag the geyser by selecting the area around the neutronium, and this should toggle an alert on the geyser itself, where you could click on the top left and it will bring up the menu of the geyser with its details. You won't be able to interact with it, but at least you'll know what type of geyser it is. As you try to establish survival stability, you'll notice there's a few more options at your disposal, and you might want to play around with it. Ranching and taming critters can provide a means of resource conversion, whether it's for the resource they create or the meat it provides after evolution. While this method would eventually outperform farming, there is a lead-up period to that point where none of the eggs can become food due to sizing up the ranch, and can't immediately be a means of calories for the dupes. We'll have another video go more in depth into ranching, but the basic idea is you want to provide food that the critter needs, give it enough space to keep breeding, and to groom the critters to keep them happy. You'll need the Tier 1 ranching skill in order to use the buildings and interact with critters. Make sure to keep the eggs out of the breeding rooms. This is actually the universal trigger for the cramp debuff that full-on stops all reproduction. The critters will vary from species to species, so it's recommended to click on the database entry to see what needs you need to fulfill. If you can't seem to figure out the solution for the egg and cramping issue, you can check out the separate video I made for the early game egg sweeping solution. As you climb the research tree, you'll stumble upon metal refining and power generation options. It's actually not recommended to do too much of either category this early on, as it will likely be inefficient and burn resources. The rock crusher, when it comes to metal refining, comes at a 50% loss of material in order to refine. This means your 100 kilograms of copper ore refines into 50 kilograms of copper bar and 50 kilograms of sand. Due to that 50% loss, it's only recommended to make enough metal bars as you need, until you could upgrade to the metal refinery. The refinery is typically more mid-game, as you would need to deal with the heat dump and big power draw that it has. Which brings us to the next topic, power. Various buildings in this game require power to operate, and those that do typically fall into two categories: constant draw and draw-on use. Gas pumps and oxygen diffusers are a couple examples of buildings that try to constantly run and thus always need power. These buildings will easily drain battery life unless you have constant power generation. The other category of draw-on use consists of buildings like the research station, that even when plugged in doesn't draw power until the research is selected and that a dupe is present. In the early game, you don't want many constant power draw buildings outside of the oxygen generators until you could automate power. And that being said, how do you automate power? As you unlock the new generators, you'll likely want to try them out and free up some dupes from running on the wheels. Around those same tacks, you should see sound amplifiers tack that unlocks the smart battery building. This smart battery, along with the automation wires from smart home tack, are the two necessary things needed to automate power. It's simple, just connect the smart battery to the generator via both automation and power line. Afterwards, set the threshold to 95 on high and 25 for low on the smart battery, and it's going to start controlling the generator. What you just did was set a sweet spot so that when the stored power in the smart battery is below 25%, it kicks on the generator to turn on again. And once the power is above the 95% threshold, it's going to turn off the generator. That way you don't burn extra resources, generate extra heat, or create more waste products. Wires should never be mixed together. That is, your power line is only as strong as your weakest segment. For example, if you have a heavy watt line that has a segment of regular wire, that power line can potentially overload and cause damage. Even though the heavy watts hold up to 25,000 watts, the entire line is actually limited to 1,000 because of the single wire segment. You can only separate different wires and loads by using transformers. And that will be the introductory into power. We'll get more into it later, but for me personally, I tend to just run a lot of wheels and jumbo batteries around my base until I get into the mid-game. As you explore your planetoid, you might run into a few abandoned buildings or ruins, or maybe even a story trade. Story trades are a side quest that you can unlock a special feature, each story providing a different amenity. These story trades are toggleable during the world seed generation at the beginning, but are on default. We'll have a more detailed look at the trades on a different video, but for now, you could safely leave the story trade buildings alone until you're ready to fulfill them. But feel free to poke around though, or even attempt to complete the story trade requests. But since they spawn randomly, you might not actually run into them on the starting planet. Another few buildings we have next are the teleporters. You are guaranteed to run into these unless you turn them off specifically at the beginning. These only exist on the starter planet and the paired planetoid and have two types. There is a dupe teleporter and then a separate resource teleporter. The duplicate teleporter is available upon discovery, and it takes you to the receiver on the paired planet. You'll also discover the location of the planet on the star map. While the teleporter has a cooldown of 5 cycles after each use, the good news is that the teleporter on the other side is on a separate cooldown of 5 cycles. So you'll be able to visit and leave right away. The resource teleporters are labeled as input-output buildings on both planetoids. These require you to activate the paired input-output via duplicate field research skill. There are 4 buildings in total and 2 sets. To utilize this, all you have to do is deliver the goods via pipeline or rail, but there is no cooldown or power costs in order to transfer said resources. From here, you should have a good idea of reaching survival stability. Produce enough food and oxygen for the colony while stockpiling resources to keep it going, but understand this isn't going to last forever. You'll eventually run out of resources you need to survive, so how do you get past this survival stability stage? The answer is geysers. While exploring, you'll notice a weird line of tiles called neutronium or an open geyser altogether. These are sources of infinite resources. Not exactly endless, as they produce a specific amount of resource on intervals when active. They will also cycle through active and dormant periods. Each geyser will vary in temperature and resource they produce, as well as problems for you to solve. An open active geyser will always attempt to create its resources, but will easily overpressure and limit themselves, and/or create inhospitable environments. Because of that, geysers usually require a build so that they can be fully utilized and not cause problems for the dupes. And while having mastery and knowledge of each geyser is important, for now all we want to do is look for a water geyser. There are a number of different types of water geysers, so it's recommended to look for a cold one if possible. Warm water geysers are around 30 Celsius and colds are around -10 Celsius. If you find a warm water geyser at 30 Celsius or a cold water geyser at -10 Celsius, you're going to want to pump the liquid as soon as it spawns and/or create a tank for the water to spill in. That way you'll always be producing. If you have a hot water source, you're going to need to build your pump out of gold or steel so that the temperature doesn't cause overheat damage, and also insulate the pool where the water is being held to minimize the heat from leaking out. Otherwise, it's wise to not actually let the hot water source erupt, since each eruption will slowly add heat to the map. Now, why is water important? Dupes don't need to drink water to survive, so what is it used for? That's going to be used for your SPOM, which stands for Self-Powered Oxygen Machine. And the goal of the SPOM is to create a way to pump, filter, and deliver both oxygen and hydrogen to where they need to go, all while keeping the power consumption low enough so that it can be powered by itself. Keep in mind that a SPOM isn't a specific design, it's a category of systems, and has a lot of different builds within it, each with their own sets of pros and cons. But don't worry, we'll walk you through a very basic SPOM so that you can get started. Of course, you're free to build your own SPOM design if you have one in mind. Now before we get started with the SPOM build, let's look at some of the research technologies you're going to want unlocked so that you could build this without waiting. Advanced automation is going to unlock some of the automation we need, the wiring and the buffer gate, along with some of the other sensors. You're going to want improved ventilation for the insulated gas pipe, the HVAC for the gas reservoir. This is going to unlock some other stuff along the way as well. You're going to want improved plumbing. Liquid tuning is a plus if you do get this teched up, but you won't be needing it for the build at the moment. Either of distillation or liquid-based refinement process, depending on which liquid you have, of polluted water or saltwater or brine. You will need air systems though at a bare minimum because you need the electrolyzer. Top of that, you will need some way to refine metal because we will be using that. The rock crusher or the metal refinery, you're only going to need a little, so you're not going to have to do too much of that. And then we will need low resistance conductors and sound amplifiers. As you can see, we get the hydrogen gen along the way, and that's going to be all the required tech you need for the SPOM. So let's get into the SPOM design. 2-floor build while we use a top floor as well. So technically it's a 3-floor setup. Start with 2 liquid locks. This is going to be 5 by 11. You can see that it's 11 tiles tall. The airflow tiles is going to be 9 tiles inside, with the insulated going out 10 so that we could box it out on the left. Now, before we continue the internal contents, let's talk about the top. We're going to be running a gas reservoir where all of the hydrogen is going to get filtered to, and that's going to feed out to the generators. These generators are going to be one-to-one determined by the number of electrolyzers you run. So if you have 2 hydrogen generators, you're going to want 2 electrolyzers. These are going to connect to the smart battery so that we don't waste resources. Connected by a automation line set up to 95/25 on the smart battery. Now, the internal parts should be made out of gold because we want that plus overheat temperature. If you use a 95 Celsius water source, understand that the oxygen is going to come out just as hot. So we just want to be on the safe side. Otherwise, it's going to be around 70. Now, in most cases, you could get away without gold, but just to be safe, I like to use gold amalgam for this. The spacing on the inside is actually kind of peculiar. You're going to be running 2 electrolyzers like this, but the spacing requires you to be 1 tile from the wall, 3 tiles between electrolyzers, and then another tile from the wall. Your gas pumps are going to be 2 pumps per electrolyzer, but set up vertically aligned. You're going to want to make sure the first pump is right on top of the electrolyzer, and the second pump is not at the very bottom. That way you could get closer to the electrolyzer to keep the pressure low. Of course, make this out of gold, and we're going to go into the gas piping. For the filter, we're going to be using a powerless filter design known as the mechanical filter. The basis for this is a gas valve. We're going to want to flip this so that it's intake above output, and from there we're going to want a gas pipeline. We're going to start from the intake, click, go right 3 tiles, go down, and then back into the output. You made a backwards looking C, and this is going to be the basis for that. On the top pump, pull tile to the right, down, and then you're going to want to bridge on to that C loop we made, and then past that, we're going to add a second bridge going to the bottom pump. So from that initial pipeline, make sure to drag between the bridges. This is an overflow setup. And then at the bottom pump, you want a U. This is to make it so that the gases merge instead of yield. That way, if the gas pump is backed up, this doesn't have any weird interactions, and it just keeps flowing out. Of course, we're going to let the dupes build this first before we go on to the next step. Okay, so the dupes have gotten the build finish on what we set up. We did some additional blueprinting as well. Conductive wiring has been added in, making sure we could attach to the generators. Also added in liquid piping. My water source is going to be coming from my slime biome. As you can see, we have a lot of water, and we're going to be pumping from the bottom. So if ever run out, we just crack open some of the other top biomes and get the polluted water. Now, once we have that built, there's a couple more things we still have to build, one of which is going to be the overflow. From the mechanical filter we set up, you're going to want to have it built like this. So we're going to add in an overflow. This is going to allow the hydrogen to go into the storage. And you're going to also want to set your gas valve to 1 gram per second. Make sure to hit enter and you see a work errand because a duplicate does have to manually adjust this. On the safe side, I like to put this on priority 9. After that's done, we're going to be setting up the automation. The automation is going to be simple. The top pumps are going to be connected and the bottom pumps are going to be connected. Next, we're going to take the Atmo sensor and put it in the bottom tile, but not the bottommost, second from bottom, in the center, right between the pumps. From there, you're going to want to draw a line going straight, and then you're going to want to add a buffer gate. That buffer gate's going to go here, and it's going to buffer the top lines. This is going to make it so that if the pressure ever drops too low, you don't have to wait that 10 seconds to prime it. This is a very fast priming build, actually. But this makes it so that you don't have to think about it, so it's kind of nice. The settings for this will show you guys in a second. So the buffer gate automation is going to be set to the default 5-second value, and then the Atmo sensor is going to be set to above 690 grams. This is going to be a sweet spot value for that positioning to help the electrolyzers keep running. The secondary reasoning is so that we could cause all the pumps to be shut off while there's still gas inside, so we don't become wasteful. Once the gas gets thin, you start pumping less than 500 grams per second, which means you're just wasting power to just continuously pump an area that's going to be very thin anyways. So just don't have it running. Now the next step is going to be the most difficult part. We're going to need to prime the mechanical filter. This is not the mechanical filter. We need to run a 1 gram packet line in here of hydrogen, entirely hydrogen. And in order to do so, we're going to fill the room up with H2 by the electrolyzer. So since we already have water, all we got to do is connect the power and let it run. Turn on the liquid locks as well so that none of the gas leaves. And what we're going to want to do is use the disconnect tool and disconnect the automation wire right here so that the top half isn't connected anymore. This should make it all red, and to make it so that the top doesn't pump. We want to accumulate H2, so we want that. Now another thing is that the bottom pumps want to pump because we need to remove oxygen so that hydrogen can spawn. So this is going to be a pump out line to the base. Doesn't really matter where, right below the SPOM or actually move into the colony, it's up to you. So let's give it some time and have the H2 accumulated. So let's plug it in. Alright, so your SPOM room should look like this. Half pink, half white, hydrogen, oxygen, like that. Unplug the power so that you don't waste anymore. Make sure to have some power on the wheel though. And then next thing you're going to do is take your disconnect tool, go into automation overlay and cut off the wire from the Atmo sensor at the bottom. Go into gas overlay and cut off the gas pipeline from both of the shutoffs and in between both bridges. Next thing we're going to want to do is pause, go into the automation wire, reconnect the bottom, go into the power line and reconnect the power source. And what we're going to want to do is make sure hydrogen pumps out into here. So because this is going to be a half-half room, and if it keeps pumping, you might get one bubble of oxygen, and that's bad. So what we're going to want to do is get one bubble of hydrogen and then cut the line so that nothing else flows out. If you don't do this and you get oxygen in this line, you might as well load a previous save, because it's going to be, you're going to have to deconstruct and rebuild this. Otherwise, there's going to be no easy way to pull it out. So let's make sure we do it right. Unpause. Make sure we get hydrogen first bubble, 2 bubbles. So from there, pause again. Disconnect tool. And then we just wait. So what should happen is we should have a line of pink dots. And there we go. So now we will always get this sequence, and it's never going to allow any other gas to interrupt it. This is going to be the basis of the mechanical filter. From here, you could actually just connect everything again. And everything should be perfect. So the initial hydrogen might fail due to the fact that this only filters out 999 grams, but you should never get to 1,000 outside of the first few pumps after accumulating, right? Because if you pump and you have nowhere to go, you have the gas inside the pump, and then when you reconnect it, it's going to pump twice and get a full bubble. So you just made a mechanical filter. You could see it work in action beautifully. And from there, the generators are on. So make sure to unplug the wheel that you used to get this primed and reconnect the conductive wiring. From there, you have a SPOM. Perfectly done. Well, except that you have to connect the Atmos at the bottom again. Now everything is actually done. So the hydrogen's going to keep everything running. You're no longer going to need this wheel and battery combo, and everything is getting filtered out. You could see that it's all hydrogen. Eventually, in 25 to 50 cycles, you're going to get some hydrogen flowing out. Of course, that might vary depending on the number of electrolyzers you run, but it's going to take time to have any of it be usable outside of the SPOM build. But you will get some extra hydrogen eventually. Otherwise, you have oxygen getting pumped out, as you could see. Oxygen is now included, and with that we have completed the early game. With the SPOM being completed, as long as you have water, you're going to have oxygen. And the only problems you might be running into now is the temperature. This may be a little bit too warm for the plants in your environment. You might be wondering what you could do with this. The answer is going to be cooling. Ideally, you're going to want to cool down the oxygen so you don't have to worry about the temperature being an issue. But that's going to be a topic we'll get into on the mid-game video. For now, I'd recommend feeding this to the Atmos suits, as that's an insulated setup of mobile oxygen so that your dupes could be equipped, having oxygen with them wherever they go, and since the suit is insulated, there's going to be minimal heat leak from that setup. And the duplicates also happen to ignore the temperature of the oxygen inside as well. That's going to be the most safe route, and I would advise to use that over the oxygen mask. But from there, that has been the early game guide. Everything in the ways that I would do it. But of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. Hopefully this is going to make the early game and the oxygen not included experience easier for a lot of you guys. And if there's topics I didn't cover, let me know. We might make a separate video to supplement that if we didn't cover it all here. And of course, if you guys made it to this far, thank you guys for being one of the real ones and watching to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe, you guys. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.